Isn't it a little bit late to have another recording here today?
Oh yeah, for us it's late, but it's definitely worth it because the thing is we've been singing finance quite a bit.
Singing or zinging?
Zinging.
You mean it
or
with a
dinging.
Z, right?
Yeah.
There you
Or
go.
dinging, or call it what you will. I think we've been doing, we've been kind of not great. And I think it's also because we've not had any representation. Yes, you've been in finance
Hey,
before.
exactly, I've been in finance.
You had a
before.
dark period, right? So I think what's really great is finally we have someone to represent finance.
Yes.
And with us today, we have Ben Murray. Welcome, Ben.
Great to be here.
Wonderful. Hi, Ben.
So Ben, fractional CFO, you're the founder of the SaaS CFO.com and the SaaSacademy.com. You have a newsletter with more than 46,000 subscribers, I believe. I was
Well
a little
done.
bit mind blown.
That's right. Yeah.
Called the SaaS CFO. What do you write about there, by the way? I've just signed up, so I'm waiting, eagerly in my inbox.
Yeah, so I send a newsletter about 2 to 3 times a month and cover SaaS metrics, SaaS operations, SaaS finance, SaaS events that I'm holding, that others are holding, SaaS jobs. So really a lot about finance and metrics, but trying to expand a little bit beyond that. For example, I'm holding a webinar on how to create a CSAT program tomorrow. So trying to cover a lot of different things in SaaS. That's gonna help the finance community, founder community, and so on.
Exciting. And you're really here to talk with us about finance and planning and revenue operations. So super excited to get into that today. I think one of the things we've been covering is just one half really of the business.
Yeah.
There's this classic saying that there's two sides to SaaS. There's the financial side and then there's the commercial side, right? And I think we've not really considered the financial side as well.
No,
Sorry.
we have. But it's like obviously when you're kind of from a revenue operations perspective and then on trying to run the business, it's so easy to paint kind of the finance folks into this like, I know these guys and the spreadsheet and they're just coming up with those numbers and those plans. We need to be the ones executing. And I think this was sometimes what we were riffing off, right? But in reality, obviously kind of, creating some kind of a hostility or something like that between those teams. By the way, any kind of hostility with finance is always a bad idea. They're the ones signing your checks. They're the ones, running your payroll. They're also the ones signing your deals if you want to sell to them. So always be friendly to CFOs and the finance department as a whole. But obviously what I think where some of the fun overlap, and then this is also maybe where the banter is coming from, that, from us with a very much revenue operations perspective, there is kind of an overlap in the types of folks that are working in those two organizations usually, right? Kind of that's at least, my experience. Would kind of love to hear you on this. But usually very analytical, usually very numbers driven and so forth, usually very neutral, right? Finance also very neutral towards the business in the sense of, are we doing, what should we be doing on the revenue side and so forth? But would love to hear also from your perspective, the rise of RevOps, right? And was there something like that before? And anyway, we'll get into some of those items, but maybe kind of to start you off with a good question here. So from your finance perspective, revenue operations entering the scene maybe 5 to 10 years ago, I mean, how do you see that team? Is it a team that should be reporting to you? Is it a team that, has some other purposes? How do you see revenue operations?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, what you guys just discussed, we could talk for hours about all those points you just mentioned. But yeah, RevOps, right? Really commonplace now. Now you're kind of hearing the rise of FinOps and what exactly does that mean? But RevOps been around, and I think where a SaaS CFO spends most of his or her time, at least in my experience, is with sales and marketing. Of course, and like you said, we're trying to be neutral, trying to facilitate decision making, make better decisions with in the business, help those department leaders. But a lot of our time as a CFO is spent with sales marketing because there's so much spend there. We've got to figure out that ROI. So I think RevOps in smaller organizations, I think that tight relationship with the CRO or VP of sales, and especially the sales ops manager, who may be kind of the de facto RevOps person controlling the closed won opportunities, the CRM data integrity, that really there's just that tight relationship. So we have to understand who's doing what. In bigger orgs, you may have financial analysts on your team who are just focused on sales analysis, because it just, there's so much data there. But typically you have a relationship, but it doesn't report to the CFO.
Yeah. I think it's so also when we talked on your show, kind of you mentioned the same thing that you as a CFO actually spend a ton of time on the sales and marketing side. I would love you to expand a little bit more on that. Obviously, there's tons of data, lots of spend is there, but from a CFO perspective, spending time there at least sounds to some of us Europeans a little bit counterintuitive. That's why I would love to have you expand on this a bit.
Yeah, because you think of all the traditional departments within a SaaS company. Say you've got tech support, professional services, customer success, R&D, sales, marketing, G&A. But just out of those, again, there's so much happening within sales each month and marketing. And I think the big thing of this, there's so much data trapped there that we're
Mm.
trying to make use of. And you think about that handoff, right, on the commercial side, and CFOs kind of think that quote to cash, right? We send out that initial quote, and then eventually we're collecting cash, which means there's a signed contract that hands, commercial hands it off to CFO to then invoice, rev rec, all that
Yeah.
great stuff. And maybe the commercial side is like, hey, accounting team, just go deal, go handle it, whatever. But we have to understand that flow from lead to collecting cash and all those conversion points in between. And I think today's CFO has to understand that lead process, the pipeline process. How is the sales and marketing team managing that? What conversion points are important? Because like you said, we want to stay neutral, but we want to facilitate. And in order for us to facilitate better decision-making investments in the business, we really have to understand the operations of what's going on in each department within a SaaS company. And I think it becomes complex in sales marketing because again, there's so much data, there's so much spend, there can be so much headcount there that there's just a lot going on and we
Yeah.
have help in that process.
Would you say that, some of that would sound to me almost like a COO, and not in many organizations you have both of those C levels kind of sitting around. Would you say that, when you talk about some of those topics, that this is a, quote unquote operational CFO that maybe kind of has that lens versus a more financial one that thinks about, and I'm sure you do this as well. I don't want to take this away from that, but things more about, yes, the accounting and the budget and maybe the M&A and the VCs and so forth. Do you think there's a divide, or is it just, CFOs just need to have this completely well-rounded, everything kind of skill?
Great point, because today's CFO, I think, has to be very operational. I came initially from the airline industry. So I worked in airline, then software, and then, of course, software transitioned into SaaS. And of course, airlines, you think a lot of CapEx, a lot of people, a lot of operations going on. So you have to understand to be effective in finance and for all those
Yeah.
FP&A teams out there, those CFOs, to be effective in finance, we have to understand the operations. Without understanding the operations, I can not do my job as effectively. So I think today's CFO has to be operational, and I kind of call it operational finance.
Yeah.
In finance account, we're not doing calculus, right? We're
Yeah.
doing very basic math, but you could say complex math based on the operations. So we have to understand what's happening.
And as you're moving closer to the GTM roles, right? When I listen to this, that's what I'm hearing. What would be the, I don't want to say like a straightforward number here, but let's just say three metrics, three things you would love commercial leaders to think about a little bit more, to understand, to move them a bit closer to the finance department. So at the end of the day, it's all an alignment and comms issue. And if people don't have the same understanding, or understanding of priorities of some of those metrics, the alignment is just harder, right? So you as a CFO, what would you love let's just say the proverbial counterpart is CRO to care the most about?
Yeah, I think, from a CFO perspective, right, I'm not going to dictate how the CRO is managing their business, but I have to understand it. And maybe I have to influence it a little bit.
Mhm.
So I think I think of the lead funnel, right? So what's happening in the lead funnel before we even get to, say, the opportunity pipeline? So thinking just at a high level, let's just nail those fundamentals. From the CRO side, what I'd want, that data I'd want to help invest more or help with decision making. Think, top of funnel, where are we getting our leads? Who's tasked
Yeah.
with getting those leads? Is it sales? Is it marketing? And then the channels. What are our major sources of customer acquisition and lead acquisition? So
Mhm.
thinking about the lead funnel,
Yeah.
top of funnel, what are those basic conversion points in between that give us either good MQLs or SQLs that then we hand over to the sales team? So just some of that basic tracking at first. And then next would be, okay, which acquisition channels really pay off there and are most effective. And then we get to the opportunity pipeline and then qualifying those opportunities, And of course, so much going on in the pipeline, and making sure those opportunities are true opportunities, make
Yeah.
sure from the start,
Yeah.
they are real opportunities so that doesn't affect our data, because that's also a big thing that I'm looking at within the opportunity pipeline is good data hygiene.
Hmm.
That if we're just creating a bunch of stuff in there and then we're closing them out, maybe we're close loss or whatever. But that affects all the data analytics that your CFO is going to run.
Yeah.
So looking at, so it's looking at that, then the stages and all that stuff. So just, that's what I want to understand.
Yeah. It's pretty funny. So I had the chance to be on Ben's show. I don't think it's been published yet. But anyway, so I was explaining something I don't know about SDRs and demand gen, and after I was done explaining it, I just saw it on Ben's face and his reaction to like, "Oh, thanks for explaining the obvious, Tony." And it's like now that I'm, hearing you talk and listening to some of that stuff, it's like, okay, no, actually I think you talk about some of this more sophisticated than some of the CROs that I have seen, and maybe this is a West Coast, East Coast versus Europe kind of thing. But I just wanted to point that out real quick here. So sorry for the obvious thing there that I mentioned on your show. But moving a little bit along here, one interesting piece where I feel RevOps and finance does overlap, and or maybe not. So this is kind of maybe a good conversation. Is in this quote unquote boring phase of planning, right? Planning season upon us right now. Kind of the bigger orgs will do planning right now. The smaller orgs will do it in December or January or something like that. But the process usually seems to be very similar. There's an understanding on the board or maybe around the investors where we should be going as an organization in terms of revenue. Then there's a financial model created around that, and then there is RevOps support maybe coming in and helping out on how would the funnel actually look like. Is this the process that you're also seeing? Is that kind of, hey, this is something that I've seen across multiple organizations, that's kind of the sequence? Or what's your experience around this financial planning plus the, some people call it revenue planning or demand gen planning or however. How do you usually kind of see that?
Yeah, and I've seen all sorts as far as planning goes there, and really, yeah, that it's so important to start with that revenue planning or the bookings planning, say for the next fiscal year, because that really we have to take that, and that was almost the same as the airline industry. What's our revenue plan, fleet plan, and then giving that to everyone to plan their departments and their business units. So same thing within
Yeah.
SaaS is what are our targets for next year, and that translates into revenue and then giving that to the department leaders so they can figure out, all right, how do I support our financial, our bookings and ARR targets for the next fiscal year? And then from there, really, it does start, if you think about kicking off the planning process for the fiscal year, it does start within sales and marketing for the most part first, or it should, because
Yeah.
we need that data, services needs that data, everyone else to figure out, okay, our revenue is going here, our customer count is going here, all that activity. And then these other departments need that in order to plan their departments to support that revenue plan. So starting with sales and marketing, and also, there it's like, it could be our quota carriers times capacity, blah, blah, and here's our ARR target at the most basic level. Like if you
Yes.
have nothing to start with, that's not great, but you'll start there. But really what I want to see is where does our pipeline sit?
Mhm.
If we're going for an ARR target, does our current pipeline hit that? If not, what's that gap in between pipeline and targets and that black box that we have to fill in with resources,
Yeah.
people, spend, conferences, whatever it is, to fill in that gap? And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong, is our pipeline only takes us so far to hit next year's ARR target. And then we've got to fill that gap and invest in that gap to support that revenue plan for next year.
Mm.
And do you see revenue operations actually play a role in this process? Because obviously kind of sales, marketing, numbers and so forth, it smells like that's a RevOps, I mean, sales ops, marketing ops, whatever you want to call it, topic. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's because really we want it to be supported by data, and I think that is part of that RevOps function, is to understand the lead flow, the pipeline flow. Where does it sit? Where are conversion points? Where does it need to go? Should everything be status quo, or do we have to improve certain conversion points as well, in addition to investment in that org to hit our targets for next year?
Yeah.
So I do feel that is a RevOps function, because there's so much data there, again, led maybe then by the VP of marketing and VP of sales influencing that.
And so maybe a controversial follow-up here. So you kind of already went in this direction. Kind of there's a revenue target, and then we need to figure out how we get to this pipeline. The spend we need to achieve in those different pipeline channels, if you will. And then sometimes that's not enough, right? You have, well, this is my customer acquisition cost budget. I don't have more. I need you to hit this number. Those are now two immovable objects. And then sometimes, and I've been guilty and exposed to it myself many times, you start like, oh, that conversion rate, maybe we just take it up a notch. And maybe that ACV over there, maybe if we have like a K or two more per year per ACV, maybe we're gonna. What's your how do you deal with that, right? Because I think all of us intellectually know, and we're kind of smiling about it and laughing about it, but we've all been guilty of this ourselves. I'm saying that.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know for your case, but how is it best to deal with that actually? Because it's so easy to fall in this trap.
Happens so often where we can't quite hit those targets, and then you're right. Let's maybe the ACV will go up. Maybe we'll improve on SQL to opportunity creation. And I'd say along the way, we're all guilty of that. I think if we have to go that route where it's just, boy, we just can't get there, we're going to play with some assumptions, just be transparent. Like if we're presenting this to the board, to our investors, just be transparent. This is where we're stretching a bit, and this is the only way to get there. But I like to do more bottoms up where, all right, we have our targets, all our departments plan. They get back to me with all their investments and their request. I compile that into a plan, into a budget. And then lastly, I calculate SaaS metrics. So I don't just say, here's the static, say CAC number, and we're driving our budget based on this CAC that's been developed. I like to then that's my final step is first revenue, the targets, everyone gets their investments back to me. I create a draft of that forecast, that budget, that plan. And then once that looks somewhat like it's reality, because the first draft is always a throwaway, it's always heavy. We've got to filter that a bit. And then finally, once I have a good plan, then I look at the metrics. Then I go into detail and what's my CAC payback, cost of ARR, LTV to CAC to see if that's trending in a direction that makes sense, that's acceptable, that's expected. And if it goes off the rails or it's just too heavy, then going back to the department, say, hey, we've got some structural misalignment here.
Very cool. I think a lot of folks do it the other way around.
I was just thinking.
And maybe your opinion is also obviously kind of very much welcomed here. But I think for CAC payback, you can actually use it. I think that's to a degree, even for the CRO, kind of a really nice way to sense check the cards that have been dealt. To understand, okay, we had a CAC payback of, I don't know, 15 months last year. The new budget is suggesting 10. Or something like that, right? So then there immediately is a bit of a yellow flag or red flag going up. But you're right on all the other metrics. It's usually an outcome of that plan. It's not an input to that plan, right? And if you do it the other way around, it's really this cart in front of the horse kind of situation. And really, really cool for you to kind of call this out and say, like, this is absolutely not how you should be doing it. You should be going bottom up. And then use those metrics to sense check whether or not this is, in your words, kind of too heavy and it's maybe not the right way to go, and maybe also isn't sellable to the board, right? At the end of the day, that's basically what you will need to achieve.
Right. At the end of the day, it's got to be sellable both operationally, that, like you said, say CAC payback has been running at 15 months and all of a sudden in the planning process, it falls to 10. It's like, boy, that's a big jump. And then what I ask is, what fundamental changes are we making in our business to make such a dramatic change in our metrics? Otherwise, I don't think it's believable. So one, operationally, and then two, it's got to be sellable to the board, believable to the board, that we're not saying our payback was at 20 and then it dropped to 6 months. Okay, forget it. It's not happening. There's got to be a trend there. And any of those disconnects, then I ask, what has fundamentally changed in our business? What thesis
Yeah.
has changed that
Yeah.
tells us we can actually impact the metrics to that degree?
I think this is a fantastic question to ask, honestly. You know, explain to me what has changed so fundamentally that we could achieve something like that, right? I think that's a good way to go about it, and a good way to, challenge whoever has been coming up with whatever those numbers are in the end. The kind of one step on top is actually almost, we talked a little bit about, the finance team and the RevOps team, how they work together, how they create this top down, bottom up plan, so to speak. One thing that I've been, that I am now guilty of myself, but previously I've been running into is kind of this hyper ambitious CEO, who's sometimes driving some of the magic that happens in the plan, right? So let's just say he or she had a conversation with the board. The board says, well, if you want to stay on this unicorn track, you need to triple obviously ARR. You need to look like this, and like that. And then obviously in the beginning, a lot of stuff is just magic and ambition, and that's why it does make sense. As you grow older as an organization, some of that craziness goes away, some of that magic goes away, and becomes a little bit more, I don't want to say business as usual, but a bit more kind of constrained, if you will. How do you deal with the for better and for worse, by the way, the overly ambitious CEO, and how do you and sometimes that lady or that guy is probably completely backed by the board as well, right? Because they wanna see the unicorn path. How do you deal with that issue actually?
It's a delicate balance. I'd say in the private SaaS world, there is a chain of command that I have to respect, and if the board believes in the CEO, that's where I do think that often the CEO's word sometimes is that final word, and the CFO doesn't want to conflict with a CEO in a board meeting, which would be a huge disaster, right? And
Yeah.
also maybe I was told this, years ago by a boss, a career limiting move, a CLM.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
but I am surprised, and my advice to boards, investors, is to talk to the CFO, maybe individually, independently, or in a board meeting, call out the CFO and have them tell his or her opinion, because I don't think that happens enough, where they're just relying on the CEO to tell the story and sometimes the CFO is sitting there, boy, that's a super rosy story. And if they would ask the CFO or pull them aside, you'd probably get a different story, and you want to be on the same page. And that's why it's delicate. But I really believe sometimes the board misses out on full transparency in the company by not talking to the CFO enough. And then when I've worked in public companies and in business units with 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 million in revenue, what you see there is that almost like the airlines where you have creeping delays, your flight's delayed 15 minutes, then it's delayed 30, then it's 60, then it's 90. And I've had that within public companies where the CEO just doesn't, or the GM doesn't want to pull down the forecast. All right, we pull it down a little in March, then a little bit in April, and then we hit July, and it's like, well, now we really have to pull it down, and we have this huge correction. So it's like these slow, because they don't want to pull the forecast down. So it's a balance, a lot of communication needed there.
So I'm actually curious, Ben, so the same question we could kind of ask if you're in revenue operations or similar function, and you see the CFO, CEO work towards a plan that's really hard for them to attain or even close. You talked about the black box, and actually bring a plan forward that can help close that gap. How do you interface and work with the CFO to actually end up with, establishing some common ground and figuring out the best path forward for the business?
So I think when we have that gap, and you say the CEO says, hey, we have to, or sometimes it's top down, and the CEO and the board is, hey, we've got to hit 10 million of bookings next year. We just have to do it. And then really it's collaboration between the CFO and the CRO to figure that out and make sure we're taking those steps and building out those steps that bridge that gap, and at least have an operational plan. And maybe it's a bit unrealistic, but if we can lay out those assumptions and what's needed, even if it is unrealistic, so we can explain it clearly, so people aren't caught off guard in the first quarter of the fiscal year, and all of a sudden we're missing plan. And like, hey, Ben, what's going on? Well, we explain that this is a stretch goal, and these are the things that we need to do.
Yeah. And so, we talked a little bit about the planning side actually already, right? And then you went into hey, you're in March, you're in April, you're in May, you're in June, you're going to take either the guidance or the forecast down. And really kind of when the year flips around and you're now in the planning period, so in the plan period rather, and you're executing, how do you make sure that you keep the organization on track and not financially speaking, but really on some of the other pieces that you mentioned, right? Kind of really being deep on the sales and marketing side then also means you understand the lead flow, the conversion rates, and so forth. Is that, and maybe, we could even skip over the ownership. Should it be with funds? Should it be with revenue operations? But what, in your experience, is kind of the best way to actually drive that plan then after it's been established?
Yeah, and it's funny, there are a lot of haters of the budget or the planning process, but I really believe a budget tests the operational knowledge of all the department leaders in our business. Because that's where, once we're in the operating year, if we have documented a good budget, all the details, all the assumptions, that's where the art of FP&A kicks in to say
Mhm.
we're closing out April and we're missing, well, why? Then FP&A has to dig in. Is it the volume of leads of what we thought? Then we've got to go back to the assumptions in the budget and see where are we missing, where are we making, what's driving that variance, so we can understand it and not just understand it and say, oh, too bad we're behind budget, but what can we do?
Mhm.
It's still like, hey, let's catch up. What can we do to get back on plan? And that's where FP&A kicks in, understand all those variances, what's driving
Mhm.
those variances, so we can communicate to the leadership team, so then we can be a little bit more proactive to try to catch up and not just say, oh, well, we're behind plan and we're going to miss for the year.
Yeah. And I think that sometimes also becomes a bit of a conversation then between the FP&A folks and then the different department leaders, right? Kind of giving this intelligence through to the organization and and helping with some of that root cause analysis. Why are we off, right?
Mm.
And trying to inform some of the operational decisions that are then being made around this. And let's just say there's a gap evolving, right? So you had a plan, maybe it was a stretch plan. You knew there was a black box that needed to be closed, and that's the gap. And now you walk into the year, and you're in the middle of it, and you're seeing that the gap is persistent. It's there. You try to plan your way out of it, but it's there. Um, what would be actually the best way for you when the CRO, the RevOps leader, whoever kind of approaches you, um, in order to attempt and fix the problem, right? And I want to take the easiest thing off the table, which would be, oh, we magically found $2 million over there that closes the gap and no cost impact. The more difficult one is actually either creating more budget, which has an impact, or moving budget around. How would you have it best that someone is approaching you almost with this business case, you could say, in order to get you like, yep, that's been approved.
Yeah, that's where the capital allocation decision making process comes into play. If we're making here, missing here, do we need to reallocate capital into other areas? But
Mhm.
also, if we constructed the budget correctly, say we're shooting for some really high revenue target, hopefully we've invested enough in sales and marketing to support that revenue target. And that's where you get in big trouble, is if we had this great revenue target, this high revenue target, but we had minimal sales and marketing investment. Revenue's coming back, but we can't pull back sales and marketing
Yep.
to make up for
Mm.
that. And then we're in big trouble. But if we constructed it correctly, where revenue moves, sales and marketing moves with that, we're missing on revenue, not sure why, our metrics aren't looking good. All right, let's pause on sales and marketing spend. So we bring,
Mhm.
revenue's coming down, but then sales and marketing expense comes down. So it moves in unison,
Mhm.
and that's where you can get in trouble if you didn't do enough in sales and marketing. So then we can see, all right, what's working, what's not working, what are our metrics looking like? Let's pause. Do we need to reallocate or just pause in general until we can get the go-to-market machine working as expected?
Very interesting. Yeah. So actually, kind of this. I just want to recap this. So really, um, instead of navigating yourself into a position where you're basically locked in to a
Yeah.
degree, right? You kind of have your sales and marketing expenses. They are. You see, there's trouble on the revenue side, but you can't really do anything about it anymore because they're disconnected to a degree. You're basically saying, well, what you really want to do is you want to keep those two things as closely aligned as possible. So when you see that one of them is veering off course, you can basically course correct by also pulling back some of the sales and
Mm.
marketing expenses, right? I mean, maybe I rephrased it wrongly, but happy for you to jump in and correct me here.
Yeah, because then that trickles down through the org, say professional services, if we implement configure our customers, and then, all right, they're not getting the pipeline flow to hire on their team and all, so it trickles to other departments. But you're right,
Yeah,
the CFO's worst nightmare is in a forecast if we have to pull back revenue, but we can't pull back the corresponding expense or the sales and
Yeah.
marketing expense is our worst nightmare because then you present to the board the next month that latest forecast and EBITDA has gone down, profitability has gone
yeah,
down, and the flags are, the alarms are going off.
But I think that's also an ideal scenario if you have, let's just say, a marketing leader who's actually monitoring the budget and the performance of their department and can see, oh, if we keep, pacing the spend on our paid channels like this is not going to be an attractive investment. So let's already now kind of dial it back and communicate it. But I think it's such an interesting component to consider when you run the planning. It can't just all be headcount, which is fairly permanent. It's you can move it, sure, but it's a pretty fixed cost versus some of the other elements. And I think that's where just one point where I think it's super important for the go to market side to really work with the CFO to have that understanding of how much flexibility we need.
Yeah, because there's
what would
there's a lot of discretionary spend in marketing, not just headcount, but really you think about a
Yeah.
SaaS P&L, most of the investment is in people, benefits, et cetera. And so that's where we get in trouble because really if we get into trouble, it's hard to make material expense reductions without either pulling back headcount in the forecast, which is not laying people off, or if we're in real trouble where then you actually have to make headcount reductions.
Mm.
yeah. I have a left field question.
Oh, wow.
Let's see how that lands. So we obviously know you're like the expert and SaaS CFO and so forth, and we talked about this a ton. But as a SaaS CFO, you're also the buyer of a lot of SaaS, and there's a lot of folks listening here that are selling to probably organizations that you've been working at and or represent or similar to. Um, and there's been a lot of talk over the last year of especially CFOs clamping down on SaaS spend and tooling spend and being careful about it and basically being in every single deal and being the showstopper in most of them. What's your advice on how to convince how to build a good case with a CFO? Do you have like a I'm not sure if this is a piece of content you push out already, so that's why it's a left
No.
field question. But do you have, hey, those are the three things that all of you are forgetting all the time, which is why I'm saying nope to all of those proposals.
Right, and there's so much talk around that and it's the year of selling to the CFO
Yes.
Yeah.
early in the year and convincing the CFO. So I think you think about a SaaS P&L, of course you have people, but yes, the internal tools, internal use software, that is a number that just grows, grows, grows. And you spend 500, you're spending $1 million on
Yeah.
just SaaS spend in general. It's hard as a CFO, right? We want to push our own SaaS tool out there, but then we're also consuming a lot of SaaS software. So I think the big thing for me, if you're talking to CFO, is I want to see more immediate impact, more immediate ROI. If you tell me it's going to take 12 months to implement the software, we can, and the realization of the benefits are way down the road. We probably can't take that on this year. So I
Mm.
think it's got to be more impactful within the current fiscal year and more of a clear, and it's hard. Like software ROI can be a fuzzy one. Lots of calculators that sales like to use. But I think it's like, does it have immediate impact this year on efficiency, leveraging our existing headcount? Does it delay headcount investment that
Mhm.
we can become more efficient with these tools within our business?
Mm. And maybe just to follow up on this one, and this is me guessing. So tell me. So CFOs are also only part of the management team. Obviously, they have a very specific role to play and a very specific perspective that they take. And in years like last one or the current one, honestly, lots of focus on cash. The venture capital market has dried up and so forth. Right, lots of people trying to get to EBITDA positive or cash flow positive rather. Um, when do you think? When do you think CFOs run out of, let's say, those how do I want to say that? Maybe those kind of coins, you know, every time you need to say no, it's kind of a relationship coin that you kind of lose, right?
Mhm.
Don't get me wrong. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what I'm saying. You also, CFOs are also just, people, and they're working within this team of the management group. And, it's only so many times you can say no, right? It's not like it's a
Mhm.
machine. It's like, oh no, we're still behind. That's why it's still no. Um, how do you deal with this? Number one, and number two, how much longer do you think can this be going on, right? And maybe there's some wisdom here.
Yeah, I think just like your department leaders have to bring forward a business case to justify new headcount, to justify new SaaS tools, whatever it is, if the CFO is going to say no, we have to justify that as well. And
Yeah.
I think the bar is higher now as those requests come to the CFO for people, for spend, for
Mm.
conferences, whatever it is, to say, what is this doing for this? What is it doing for the org? What's the ROI? Is it efficiency? Is it increased pipeline? Increase revenue, whatever it is. So I think we need to see more data-driven decisions. So that's where I say the bar is higher. If they come in, hey, I just need these people.
Yeah.
Well, why? And they can't really tell you why or the payoff. I think now that's a no.
Yeah.
Whereas before it's like, okay, I'll give you a free pass maybe. And then later
Yeah.
when you come back, tell me
Yeah.
why. You need to
Yeah.
justify this. But now I think if there's no clear reason, if it's financially justified, if it's efficiency, if it's revenue, whatever it is, if we can't justify it, I think then it's a no. Because and we will hurt our reputation as a CFO if we're just saying no, 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 no,
Yeah.
which some CFOs are known for. But again, that's where CFOs operationally we have to facilitate. We want to invest in the business, but we need compelling reasons why.
Yes. I think many folks get this wrong on the non-CFO side, which is your last point. You actually want to invest in the business, right? You know that growth is only coming from investment. It's not going to come from nothing. You're not going to save your way to be a unicorn, or you're not going to save your way to 100 million, right? And CFOs very much have that mindset, and I think again, because of the neutrality and because of um the eminence that some CFOs carry, and oh yeah, and I've seen this before, and a bit more relaxed about some of these things. Um, I think they then become also the neutral bedrock that some of that stuff should be built around, right? And I'm not trying to make this position greater than it is, but it's I think this is what this carries actually, and I think this is a resource in the organization that needs to be utilized in the right way, right? And then kind of building this properly, I think is extremely crucial.
But you know what? I think it's also important that it's not just a yes man or yes woman
Yeah, yeah,
sitting in the CFO seat, just, check, check, check to everything. I do believe it is critical to have some checks and balances in place. And that's where I'm like, it makes complete sense that if, you're getting asked by the CFO, what's the business case here? And you're a complete blank. Well, then you just found a cool tool that you really wanted, and it happens to a bunch of people in an organization because there's so much new stuff, getting out there every day. So I think that's a pretty critical component. I think it also forces us in this environment, if you're working on the commercial side, to really reflect over what is the business case here. Is this really the investment of a limited set that I want to make this year? And then maybe instead of asking permission, maybe you could consider working on that case with the CFO.
and yes. So Ben,
Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
great point. That's where the coaching comes into play from the CFO is working with those department leaders. They bring that business case forward, the investment people, whatever it is, and say, hey, this is what the CEO is going to ask. When I see this, I know these are the questions. Or if we present this to the board, here are the holes that you need to fill in. So there's a lot of coaching. That's where we have to sit on the fence as a CFO, and we want to push back in a constructive way that helps the process.
Yeah.
So I think that's where that coaching is, where they sit down and hey, Ben, I really need these investments. Well, here's what they're going to ask. Here's what will improve the presentation of this investment to the CEO and the board.
And just just kind of turn the corner and go a little bit back to revenue operations. I think to a degree, this kind of coaching, this kind of support, this kind of thinking about, okay, why would in this case maybe the CFO or the CEO say yes to that? Those are also things where RevOps leaders, and I'm not talking about the CRM admin RevOps, but director RevOps, VP RevOps, can actually also coach and support the go-to-market leaders, at least in my experience, to help them a little bit kind of reason and logic through the case in order to make it, more appealing and or, increase the chances of that actually landing with the CFO, which then in turn also can help those RevOps leaders to, build a better relationship with their go-to-market leaders, with their counterparts, right? I think there's so many overlaps or so many similarities actually between the finance piece and the RevOps piece when you look at it through a specific lens. They're clear, non-similarities as well, don't get me wrong. It's really, really interesting to kind of explore and discover this a little bit. Maybe last question from my side. RevOps, should it be reporting to the CFO or should it be reporting to the CRO?
I think the CRO, because I think then that keeps the checks and balances, as long as the CFO is involved, right? If it's just CRO and RevOps off doing their thing with the direct ear to the CEO and the CFO doesn't get involved, then you're going to have problems. But I think the CFO, again, has to be involved in that process, influence the process, approve headcount investments, approve discretionary investment in the business, whether it's sales and marketing or not. And then you can keep that nice check and balance where, again, you can push back, you can be constructive in that process. So I think split.
Wonderful. I think we're coming up on time here.
We are, but man, this was, I think it was so interesting to get the perspective from the other side. Ben, thank you so much for that. I really appreciated it. I definitely believe that a few of our listeners, they learned a thing or two actually now.
And I think you'll have some more subscribers,
Oh, great. Yeah.
That's
well, you have two.
That's also
you have
great.
two, right?
No, but Ben, this was fantastic. Thanks a bunch for lending your brain here and chat with you about these things. I think a lot of those topics are very present with our audience right now, and I think you might have helped some of them quite a bunch. So thanks a bunch for that.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ben.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.